Hi, welcome to Visual Studio Toolbox. I'm your host, Robert Green, and joining me today is Jordan Matthiesen. Hey, Jordan.
Hey, Robert. Good to see you.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Jordan's a program manager in Visual Studio Land, working on the JavaScript editor.
Yep.
And you're here to show us what's new in JavaScript editing in Visual Studio 2015.
Yep, we've got a large number of changes.
In case you guys missed it, by the time you're watching this, has released. So go get it.
Excellent. So yeah, I'll take you through some JavaScript changes we've got and talk a little bit on the TypeScript editor improvements as well.
Excellent. Cool.
So let's just jump right in. So what I've got is, to prime this here, we're just going to look at some JavaScript behind a sample photo browsing application I've built. This is a pretty simple application using Angular, the Angular JavaScript library version 1.4, which is a very popular library. We heard from a lot of developers are using it in their projects. They wanted great support for it in VS. So it's one of the libraries we've got by default out of the box support for in our JavaScript editor.
Okay, cool.
So
and the next version of that is going to be written with TypeScript.
Yeah, so the Angular team announced that Angular 2 is going to be written using TypeScript, and that will be one of the languages, one of the flavors of JavaScript you could use for building an Angular app. So you could use straight JavaScript version 5.1, that's the most widely adopted right now. You could use the new ECMAScript 2015 version of JavaScript, or TypeScript will be the full, like best tool.
Is that also known as 6?
Yeah, ECMAScript 2015, also known as ES6.
ES6, okay. All right.
So yeah, we're not going to talk much on the HTML, but just to help set context for the application, I'll show you how this front page was set up here. So if you haven't used Angular before, you'll typically set up something to identify the app module for your project. So in this case, I've named a module Photo Browser, and if you look down here, I'm using a controller named List. So in Angular, you'd use a controller to define the logic for the page. What handles getting the data to your HTML, the view, and back and forth. So we're going to have a list controller we'll use, and it's putting into this container of photos a navigation bar with a search box, and this piece here that I'm going to highlight is a chunk of code that's actually putting those images on the page. So it's using this ng repeat attribute that comes from Angular, which inside of this it's saying iterate through a set of images. And so for each image in that images collection, it's got some logic here to do some filtering. And then in the body of this, we put out a thumbnail for each image. And so that includes putting out an image with, here's the URL, it's a property of this image object, and a title, which is another property of the image object. So now if we go to JavaScript, where I'm here to talk about, you can see where this is coming, how this gets kind of bound together when the app runs. So we start off right away using Angular defining that photo browser module for our app, set up a controller with Angular named List, and then this bit right here that we'll talk about some is how you set up dependencies in Angular. So Angular has this big piece about dependency injection. At runtime, it will dynamically combine all the things your controller depends upon and pass that into your controller function to use. Here I'm just taking a dependency on this Angular scope service that lets me put data into the view, take stuff back out.
Okay.
And so when you look at our list controller here, I'm going to push this out of the way, and you'll see that we assign that images array to the scope. And this is what we're iterating through on the HTML file.
Okay.
So that's set up out of the way. I'll just show you one of the first things you've just seen that's new with the 2015 editor is I've collapsed down this array. So we've now got simple little improvement to collapse down arrays or these object literals that span multiple lines. Just one way to clean up your code a bit. So this is that hard-coded set of list of images I've got right now where we talk about the two properties.
And then when you hover over that, it displays, right?
Yeah.
After you collapse.
So if we collapse it down, you can get a quick preview of the content.
So now here's a question for you. If you do this in VB and C#, the code that displays is in color, but in JavaScript it's still in black and white. Is that something that you are A, looking into doing, B, able to do?
It is something, yeah, actually, we are looking at doing that over time. What we've done in this release, and you'll see in a bit, is the TypeScript editor is now built on top of the same language editor as Roslyn and C#. So TypeScript's got the colorization. We're looking at how do we bring that same editor experience to JavaScript too. So
the editor's built, but the language is not built on top of Roslyn, right?
Right.
But the editor can be?
For TypeScript, the editor is. Okay. In this release of the TypeScript
for TypeScript,
that's a new feature. Yep.
Right, got it. Okay.
So right now, our JavaScript editor is not. So it's got, there's some differences in the experience.
Right.
And another quick thing you'll see here is if we go in now, we've got a couple to-do items here that we're going to address in this walkthrough. If I look at the task list in VS, now I can see my to-do items coming in. So this is a little, the task list has been in VS for a while. It gives you to-dos and hack comments. Now you get those from your JavaScript file and TypeScript in this release. A little improvement.
Cool.
And it's also showing me for all open files to-do comments. So you can actually see here a bunch of comments from the Angular team themselves in the angular.js file I have open in the other window.
Oh, can you? Oh, I see.
Yeah, so if we went here, then there was a to-do comment sitting up in angular.js that was just surfaced to me.
Can you filter those out in case you're, at the moment, not interested in the work they're needing to do?
Yeah, you could sort this list here or take and filter out just to your current file.
Right. Got it.
So what we're going to do is, I usually like to make changes, like maybe address one to-do at a time, but for the sake of speed here, I'm just going to do both of these to-do comments in one go right now.
Okay.
So what we're seeing here is 2 comments of taking our image fetching code and moving it out into a service, which in Angular a service would be like a reusable component. You can use in other services or other controllers. So we're going to define one of those, and it says to get the images from the server, so we'll make an HTTP request to get those files. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and define this service we're going to use. And here you're seeing IntelliSense for Angular's kind of main API. So this is where it's showing me the API I can use to define a service. So I'll make a photo service. And I'm going to say that my service will depend upon this HTTP thing. We'll talk about that in a moment. And so what I've done is I'm telling Angular, when you run bind me to this HTTP service, this $sign in Angular is just their convention for this is an internal Angular service. So HTTP is what we can use that comes with Angular to just make HTTP requests. So here we'll define our service function. And what this service will do is return an object with a single function we can use for getting those images. And so what I'll do here is call the HTTP API, and let's say I don't remember what the APIs look like for this HTTP service. You'll see that Visual Studio is giving us IntelliSense for that dependency.
Ah, cool.
So that's part of this Angular support we have. We can actually understand the dependency injection model with Angular and give you IntelliSense for those dependencies. So I can see here that the get function takes a string, and so we're going to pull from this JSON file I have. And optionally, there's a set of config settings. And if I open this curly, I'm actually getting IntelliSense for this config object.
Oh, nice.
So this is what we call object literal IntelliSense. It's a way that we've given you to document your own code so you can describe the shape of this object. In JavaScript, it's a really common pattern to have these config parameters to functions. So for example, I'll just take response type and be explicit and tell Angular I'm going to get back JSON. Okay. And we're going to change our service real quick to our controller real quick to use this photo service. And now you'll see that, again, we get IntelliSense now for my own service. There's our getImages function. And I already know that since I'm returning the result of an HTTP request, I'm going to work with that HTTP kind of object that comes back. And IntelliSense here helps remind me again of the shape of that object. So with HTTP, you define a callback to be made when it's a successful HTTP request. Right. So this is going to take a function that gets the result of that call. And just so you know what comes back in this JSON, we'll look at our file real quick. So our JSON file this is what it's returning. It'll be an object with a single member named files, and that's our array of images. So what I want to do is put into the scope that files array. There we go. And we'll go ahead and remove this. And now we'll refresh the page, make sure it's looking good. So far, so good.
Yep.
To prove that I don't have a caching issue going on or anything, I'm going to modify our JSON file so you can see that it really is working now. And we should not have any more B's, which some people would like.
All right.
Right. So now I can take out that other to-do comment, and I'm done with that task. So okay, let's look at a few more things that are new that were going on in here though to make this experience work out. So one of these, I mentioned Angular IntelliSense already, but if we look, say, at angular.module, you'll notice it's telling me that this API takes a string. It's got an optional array of requires and a config function. If I go to definition on this, you can see that this is actually what's driving those comments. So we've now got JSDoc support in the 2015 editor.
Cool.
So JSDoc is a de facto standard out in the JavaScript community for documenting your code. For a long time, Visual Studio's had support for XML doc comments with JavaScript like C#, but this is just taken off in the JavaScript community, so it's something we've got built in. So things like Angular now will just work.
Right.
And likewise, I could put this into my own code, so we could document the getImages function with a return and say that